Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is GOP strategist Gail Gitcho, and I do want to note before we get started, she did work on Vivek Ramaswamy's campaign. Gail, thank you so much again for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you, Brittany.
Great to see you too. Last night was a historic night in Iowa, predictable yet historic. Trump had a landslide victory. Can you first start for us? What were some of your key takeaways from the 2024 Iowa Caucus?
Well, it's not exactly surprising that turned out the way that it did. Like you said, it was historic. President Trump won by over 50%. That's the largest victory margin in the caucus history. And then you had Ron DeSantis come in a really distant second, Nikki Haley right behind him, and then Ramaswamy in the single digits, who ended up dropping out quickly after the results were tallied. So, but what I think was interesting, and maybe your audience picked up on this, was the speeches that everybody gave after it was over. You probably saw Donald Trump speak. So he spoke in a way that we really haven't seen him speak ever before, maybe in a very long time, but we really haven't seen this human side of Donald Trump. He talked about his family in a very loving way. He didn't name call any of his opponents. There was no DeSanctimonious or bird brain or fraud. I think it was a tactic that he employed that is going to be helpful to him down the road.
Can you talk about the other two speeches, both Nikki Haley and Governor Ron DeSantis? Do you think their speeches helped them or hurt them? Because Ron DeSantis did come in second, a distant second behind Trump, and Nikki Haley was very close to him. So did his speech help or hurt?
His speech was bizarre. His speech was, he got up on stage and it was like, he was just happy to be there. He said that he punched his ticket out of Iowa. And I think that it should raise a lot of eyebrows because he put all of his eggs in the Iowa basket. He visited all 99 counties. He and his super PAC spent tens of millions of dollars on retail politics, directly reaching out to voters. So for him to get up on stage and say, "We made it," when he lost by 30 points was kind of bizarre.
And Gail, now can you talk about Nikki Haley's speech? What did you make of that?
Well, Nikki Haley really is the only candidate who learned a lesson during this whole primary process, because what she did was she tied in a very effective and clearly communicated way Biden and Trump together. And she hasn't done that before. No candidate has done that before. But what that says is that she realizes, unlike Ron DeSantis, that there is another election that's going to be held in New Hampshire next week. So because what she did, she was on offense the entire time. And that is so important. She tied them together, not only their age, but also the divisiveness that each of them have created in their own way in the country, along with some of the chaos. And she also talked about electability, which is so important. What she said last night was, yes, President Trump beats Biden in some states, but I beat him in every state. So I'm not saying that that's going to exactly help her throughout the rest of the primary calendar, but she did herself some favors by being on offense and talking about President Trump and Joe Biden together. She said 70% of the country doesn't want to see a Biden-Trump rematch. So that's when she was talking about the electability and that she can beat Biden in every state. So I thought that was very smart.
So with all of that said, who do you think came out as a winner and who came out as a loser last night? I mean, obviously Trump is the winner, but any other winners?
No, not at all. The night could not have gone better for him. I mean, it was his perfect scenario that he won in a historic margin, that he won over 50%, that Vivek Ramaswamy dropped out, and all of his support is going to be consolidated to President Trump. But also that Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis came in second and third, so distant from him. As you said, 30 points behind him was Ron DeSantis. That basically says that his campaign is over. Nikki Haley right behind him, also more than 30 points behind. That blunts her momentum going into New Hampshire. So really, the night could not have gone better for President Trump. The loser here is Joe Biden. Joe Biden is it's going to be a very tough map for Joe Biden once this primary is over and he actually has to start campaigning against a Republican.
And all three of these top contenders beat Biden in a head-to-head matchup, according to a recent CBS poll. But a Biden supporter, also the Illinois governor, Pritzker, he said this last night, and I want to get your reaction. Quote, almost half of the base of the Republican Party showing up for this caucus tonight voted against Donald Trump. Think about that. Do you think that's just spin? Because I was talking to an Iowa reporter and she said these weren't never Trumper Republicans. They were pretty much anyone but Biden Republicans.
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, there's always been this faction of Republicans that wanted to see an alternative emerge. From last year, if you remember in 2022, when the midterm elections came around, President Trump was not popular. I mean, he was blamed for what should have been a red wave. So his popularity only grew since the November 2022 elections. And a lot of that has to do with the Democrats. The Democrats have put forward 4 indictments against him. They've also tried to keep him off the ballot in 2 different states that is going to have to be decided by a court now. And Republicans are saying, yeah, we may not like Trump's tactics and some of the stuff that he says and he tweets, but what the left is doing is not fair. So the left is really fueling some of that support that could have gone to a Trump alternative, instead going to Trump, putting him above the 50% that we saw last night.
If you and I were talking in March or in November of 2022, right during the midterms, and it said, or anyone said, this is going to be the outcome of the Iowa caucus, I don't think anyone would believe that this is what happened because Donald Trump's popularity was at a low for him. Everyone blamed him for the red wave that did not happen. Governor Ron DeSantis was touted as the future of the Republican Party. Now he's bypassing New Hampshire for the primary next week, going straight to South Carolina. What do you think of that?
It just tells me his everything that's happened since yesterday to right now just tells me that he knows his campaign is over. You know, if he's not going to go to, if he thinks New Hampshire is a lost cause, which it is, South Carolina is even more of a lost cause. So really the only thing that I think is going to happen with Ron DeSantis in South Carolina is that he's going to suspend his campaign. You know, when you get on a stage after coming in a distant second place at the Iowa Caucus and you're just glad to be there, that tells me that he knows that his campaign is over. They put all of their eggs in the Iowa basket. Now they're bypassing New Hampshire, going to South Carolina, where Nikki Haley and Donald Trump are really going to be the top 2 that voters will consider.
Iowa isn't always the predictor of the nominee. Obviously, we're looking at you, Pete Buttigieg, Ted Cruz, Rick Santorum, Mike Huckabee. But because it was such a blowout, because Donald Trump won, I believe, 98 out of 99 counties, do you think it is?
Yes, it was a complete blowout. In fact, the only county that he lost was Johnson County, and that went to Nikki Haley, and she only won it by 1 vote, by 1 person. So that's why it was so historic.
Yeah, he almost won the full Grassley there with all of the counties. Nikki Haley last night, who came in third, made an interesting comment that she said Iowa really showed that this is now a 3-person or 2-person race. Do you think that's true?
She wants to take him on head to head. I mean, really, the only way that you can try to topple Donald Trump is to take him on one-on-one. This primary was not an effective campaign for anybody. Any of the people that were on that stage when Donald Trump was not on that stage, all they were doing was fighting against each other. And, you know, it turns out that fighting against each other and not attacking the front runner is not a good strategy. I mean, everybody was saying that during the primary, but what we saw was these candidates going after each other and hardly attacking Biden and Trump at all. So that's why I think that the Trump alternative that never happened, it was so disappointing to those people who were, you know, looking for somebody to say, hey, I can be the next president. I can be as tough as Donald Trump. I can take the fight to the bad guys and win, just like Trump does, but I can be more likable. And really, that's what those Trump alternative voters were looking for.
Do you think when it comes to the Iowa caucuses this year, when it comes to the start of primary season, there's anything missing from this national conversation? Or do you think it's pretty cut and dry and Trump's going to be the nominee?
Well, Trump is looking to lock this up by, next week. And he could, if he wins New Hampshire decisively. Even if Ron DeSantis drops out before New Hampshire, his support, more than half of his support, is going to go to Trump. Some of it may, a few percentage points may go to Nikki Haley. All of Vivek Ramaswamy's, even though his support is minimal, will go to Trump as well. So that still puts a gulf between Trump and Haley in New Hampshire that is going to be very hard to make up. And then remember, next is South Carolina. So they're going to go into South Carolina. And what South Carolina is saying is that, Nikki Haley, we like you, but they love Donald Trump. So I think that if it's not over by next week, it'll be over by South Carolina. And that's really what the president is hoping to do so that he could start focusing his attacks on Joe Biden. And that is going to be where, we really see if the head-to-head matchup is going to be like what it was in 2020.
Gail, as we look towards New Hampshire come next week, Super Tuesday's coming up soon. What should we be looking out for? What's on your radar?
Well, what I'm looking out for is are these candidates going to start to drive a message? I mean, President Biden is at a historic low. His approval ratings are in the 30s, and he doesn't have a message. He doesn't have a record to run on. And what his message has been is Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Biden wants to make this election all about Trump. He doesn't have a message. And if he's trying to make this about Donald Trump being a threat to democracy, the people in the suburbs that are ultimately going to determine the outcome of the November election, they're not sitting around their kitchen tables saying, oh, we want to talk about a threat to democracy. What they're worried about is how they're going to afford groceries, and why is my rent so high, and how are my kids going to stay safe, and what's going on, with national security and the border. Those are the things that people want to hear. So what's on my radar is what candidate is going to start driving an effective message as the primary ends and we go towards, just attacking Biden. So that'll be interesting to see. That this has just been such a mind-bending primary season that it's hard to really anticipate what's next. But what I hope is what's next is that any Republican candidate is going to start to train their fire on Joe Biden, because he just has such a big target.
And I'm curious about what you think the effectiveness of Joe Biden's message is. You kind of answered this because it was effective in 2020. He won. Now it's the same message, but 4 years later, Donald Trump's a threat to democracy. What are people thinking about that when it comes to Democrats, Republicans, independents?
Well, that's a great question. The Wall Street Journal this morning editorialized that if Donald Trump or if Joe Biden actually thought that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, then he would get off the ticket, he would drop out and let somebody from the Democrat Party, from a younger generation, form a campaign and run against Trump. So, but I don't think that that's going to happen. I think that what people think about Biden is that he's not going to be very effective. His approval ratings and Kamala Harris's approval ratings are historically low. So, the message that even David Axelrod, a Democrat strategist, has said Joe Biden doesn't have a message, and he also doesn't have a record to run on. It's not like he can say, I lowered taxes, I closed the border, I fixed our broken immigration system, inflation is down. He can't say any of those things. In fact, I can't think right now of one thing that Joe Biden can say that is positive about his record that's going to appeal to those independent voters that are ultimately going to decide who becomes the next president in November.
What's really interesting is that most Americans, according to polls, don't want to see a 2020 rematch. Yet Republicans are resoundingly saying, I want Donald Trump to be the GOP nominee. Why do you think that is? And what do you think the future of the GOP is then?
Well, Donald Trump would only have one term left. And what he wants to do, he says, is finish the job that he started. He talks a lot about the border. He talks a lot about inflation. He talks a lot about fixing, the United States' place on the national stage when it comes to national security. So what happened was in 2022, as you mentioned correctly, that Donald Trump's approval ratings were at a historic low, and Republicans were really looking for somebody else that was going to be as tough and have the same kind of grit that Donald Trump was and be as effective as Donald Trump was during his presidency, but be more likable. And that person didn't emerge as the alternative candidate. And I think that there's two reasons why. Number one, as I mentioned earlier, the left spent so much time and energy and money on these 4 indictments that Donald Trump has, hoping to knock him off. But also what happened was the expectations for who I think was the main alternative candidate to Republicans was Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis just didn't meet the moment. He didn't go after President Trump as he should have. He was waiting for a one-on-one matchup, which is never going to happen. I think what he's going to do when he reflects on this primary at some point is say, I should have gone after Trump more, and I should have gone after Biden more and his failed record. So when it comes to the future of the Republican Party, and if Republicans are thinking we want somebody like Trump, then Donald Trump only has one term left. So if he wins, he would be a lame duck president. And so the Republican Party would then have a few years to figure out, okay, how do we win the Senate back, number one, but also who do we put up that Republicans are going to like and be as effective as Trump was when it comes to being tough against the people that Republicans don't like, but have a bigger approval rating and maybe have an approval rating bigger in the suburbs and women specifically in those suburbs. I would like to mention one thing that was interesting last night. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution came out with their survey, and it was so interesting to see that the Black vote in Georgia Trump is 21 points ahead of Joe Biden. That makes a very tough map. In Georgia, a Republican needs to have about 10 to 14% of the Black vote. Donald Trump was 21% above Joe Biden. If that holds in Atlanta and places like Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit, that's going to be a very tough map for Joe Biden to overcome in those swing states with those kinds of numbers.
That is an interesting point, and I'm curious as to why you think that Donald Trump is making gains in that specific demographic.
Well, I think it's because Joe Biden isn't. Joe Biden isn't talking to people. He went to Charleston a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about the Black vote and how he was was representative of Black interest, with trying to get inflation down, creating more jobs. But it didn't really strike a chord because his main message is about Donald Trump being a threat to democracy. So I don't necessarily think that I do think that Donald Trump's message is much sharper to every single community, and Joe Biden's isn't. So I don't necessarily think that it's something that Donald Trump is saying. I think that it's what Joe Biden is not saying. So that's I think a really interesting thing for everybody to keep an eye on.
That's a really interesting point. And before I let you go, I jotted down something that you said when you were talking about DeSantis, that he did not meet the moment. And it reminded me of a young star of the GOP back in 2016, and that was Marco Rubio. Yes. So do you think a DeSantis now could be the future of the GOP in 4 years, or is that moment gone?
Well, he could be. I mean, in politics, it's like, nobody's ever really down. You can always come back, and that's what President Trump did. So yes, I mean, Ron DeSantis can go back and be an effective governor because he is an effective governor. He has done so much for his state, and he ran on his record. He talked about the great things that he did in Florida. So I think this is just really a bump in the road for him. He can go back and be a great governor and then try to come back in 4 years when Trump is essentially out of the picture, and be that person who is as tough as Trump, but as more likable.
Gail Gitcho, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you.